Welcome to this talk and welcome back to Professor David Anderson. Professor, thank you for coming back on.
Thank you very much, John, for having me.
Now, Professor Anderson, as you might know, is a lifelong physician, consultant physician, endocrinologist, medical professor, and general polymath with a wide range of interests. So always fascinating to talk to him. Now, the first thing I'd like to do, David, if it's okay with you, is a bit of an update on vitamin D. Is vitamin D deficiency common, and what should people aim to do to optimize their vitamin D situation?
Yes, John. D deficiency is almost universal. It probably is universal in everybody at some time of the year. And in order to optimize it, I take a fairly simplistic view, which is that although naturally it comes from the effect of sunlight, ultraviolet light on your skin, that is not reliable. And since it's inexpensive, it's almost costs almost nothing. By far the best thing is to supplement yourself with vitamin D. My wife and I we live in Italy, where there's actually quite a lot of sun in the summer at least. But we take now regularly year round. Every month, we take the contents of 100,000 unit vial, broken onto a piece of bread, taken with nice Umbrian olive oil, and that is sufficient to give you an average of 3,000 to 4,000 units a day, and depending on the length of the month, obviously. In addition, I take twice a month, I take a capsule of calcifediol. Now, vitamin D itself, or vitamin D, depending on where you come from, it's a unique sterol with a fracture in the B ring, which can only be provided by the action of ultraviolet light on the precursor, 7-dehydrocholesterol. It's also the precursor of cholesterol. So 7-DHC, dihydrocholesterol, can go one of two ways. Now, we were evolved, first of all, our species, in Africa, where the problem is the sun's overhead all the time, and it's very hot, so you're wandering around semi-naked, and the risk is actually sunburn. So native Africans and Asians are born with a pigmentation of the skin to serve as a sunblock. And we moved out of Africa probably 200,000 years ago or more. I may have got the date wrong. To occupy the northern landmass. The north of the equator is where 2/3 of the world's landmass lie. So that means the further north you go, the more you are at risk of D deficiency. Now, actually, a confusing thought is that vitamin D is called a vitamin, implying that you have to have it in your diet. It's also called the sunshine vitamin, which for obvious reasons. But you can get it from fish. But obviously fish haven't evolved to be eaten by us, and they may have been evolved to be eaten by other fish. They get their vitamin D from plankton, and it evolved over 1 billion years ago in the surface of the ocean. I think David Grimes mentioned this on an earlier video. It evolved actually to protect the plankton as a sunblock for them. And then with evolution of more advanced creatures, fish started to eat it and evolved a vitamin D receptor. And this unique sterol. It's unique because it's uniquely flexible, and this is explained in our book. It's the vitamin D receptor actually acts along with vitamin A or retinol, which also has a receptor, and the two act in concert to control 3% or about of our genome. That's about 1,000 genes. Now, I think the most recent function that's evolved is control of blood calcium and calcium absorption in the gut. So one confusing thing is to think of it purely, vitamin D purely as a hormone. What happens when you take vitamin D or you're exposed to the sun in summer? Vitamin D is formed, it's absorbed into the skin, or if you take it by mouth, it's absorbed into your lymphatics. It's fat soluble, and it travels in the blood and gets one hydroxyl group added in the 25 position. So it's now got two hydroxyl groups, an original one in the 3 position and one in the 25 position. And that is called calcifediol. And that is the blood reservoir form for all uses of vitamin D. And so you must have a level. I argue that and pointed out extensively that just relying on what is necessary for its hormonal function, which obviously is very important to control ionized calcium levels in the blood, otherwise you get cramps or you freeze, you can't fight or flight or fight or fly. But that is a function which has evolved to be controlled by another hormone called parathyroid hormone. And actually parathyroid hormone monitors the calcium and will drive the system in the event of you having very low levels of vitamin D. All of it will be consumed to control your ionized calcium. And if there isn't enough, then you get rickets and osteomalacia. Now, we have an organization or a committee in the UK called NICE, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, their proposal, but it's also supported by a whole lot of people who should know better and realize that 400 to 600 units of vitamin D a day is not enough for all the other functions. You need to multiply that by 10. You need to go up to 4, 5, or 10,000. You can multiply it by more or less whatever you want because it's very, very safe.
So you take 100,000 units a month and you're absolutely fine with that. There's no adverse reactions from that, and that maintains your blood levels.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, as I said, I take an extra 2 calcifediols a month, or one every 2 weeks. But equally, and I would recommend this for people who are overweight, very overweight. I mean, I'm probably slightly overweight.
Aren't we all?
You know, actually obese. Yeah. Because vitamin D itself is fat soluble, it'll get sequestered away in your fat, and therefore you're at more risk of D deficiency. So something to do is we should be getting much more calcifediol out. I wouldn't recommend taking the active form. I should have mentioned earlier, I didn't, that calcifediol is called upon by all the tissues that need vitamin D, like especially your immune cells, but almost every tissue in the body has vitamin D receptors.
And certainly all of the white blood cells have it.
Absolutely, and they've got a very complicated and very highly organized mechanism for controlling their own local needs of vitamin D, which as we discussed in an earlier video, it's a complex mechanism, and I would hope anybody who wants to learn more about it will download a copy of our book downloadable from our website, dgreatbiologyreset.com,
Links will be
and you'll
provided.
see. And the title of the book, incidentally, is intentionally playing games with the Great Reset of Klaus Schwab and other people trying to control the world. Because what they're trying to do,
I suspected that, David, I must say.
it's not obvious at all, is it? Anyway,
Yeah.
so the Schwabian Gatesian model, which is, in my opinion, it puts vitamin D deficiency right at the center of the current plans,
Yeah.
which some of them, not all of them with this Christian name of Bill, but one certainly is intent on reducing global population. There are apparently too many people around. There are certainly too many people with far too much money, but they intend to get rid of the ones with no money and therefore no value, like you and me.
Well, we don't want the place overrun by useless eaters, David, do we? I mean, you know.
That's what I'm not sure who said that first, but you
Yeah, I
just
mean,
said
they just lie around consuming food, living, being happy, falling in love, getting married, reproducing. What's the point of all that, you know?
Well,
Just
it certainly seems pointless if you're a born psychopath,
yeah,
because one of the features, one of the joys of being a human being a mammal actually. I mean, our cat shows the same affection. You know, she doesn't see in my distress her own distress, which is what human beings do. But she sees in her distress the need to get comforted by me.
yeah.
She
And
seeks empathy.
yeah, I agree completely. You know, what you were talking about there, these things that happened in the ocean, all these mega eons ago, you know, a billion years ago, that this change in eukaryotic algae, and the production of the vitamin D, and the fish and the concentration, all of these things had to happen just right throughout this entire
Absolutely.
sequence of time. And you know, to me, this is the great majesty, divinity, divinely
It's the
inspired.
miracle of life on Earth.
Yeah,
Vitamin D,
yeah,
because it controls so much, lies right at the center of the
yeah,
miracle of life on Earth. Whatever your religious or
yeah.
other beliefs are, one has to marvel at just how well biology has worked for us at this particular point in space-time.
Yeah, and it's
The
all working
problem,
towards this particular point in time. All these things that happened, and if one of these things hadn't happened, no one would be listening to this video. Well, probably no one will listen to this video anyway, David. But you and I wouldn't be talking if all these things hadn't happened at just the right time, very often in just the right place. It's just
well,
amazing that we're here.
I think it's even more amazing when you look back at actually the chances of us being here, if one will look back 200,000 years ago, were very low, because look at the Neanderthals, for example, became extinct. We cross-mated with a few
We did.
Neanderthals,
Yeah.
so there are some Neanderthal genes, but I'm, as you said earlier, I'm obsessed with, or very interested in, man's distant past. And
I'm going to come on to that, David, first of all. But I just want to clarify, because a lot of people won't be sure about this preparation here, which you kindly sent me. This is calcifediol.
yeah,
Now,
calcifediol.
Calcifediol, sorry. Now, this is the activated form of vitamin D. So,
No, it's the reservoir form.
the
John.
reservoir
it's the
form,
half active form.
yeah. But yeah, correct. But that takes a couple of weeks to get produced. So we have this greasy stuff in our skin. The sunlight acts on that. That substance goes to the liver to be transformed into this. And
Yes.
of course, the older we get, the less greasy we get, and the less vitamin D we'll actually produce from any given amount of sunlight. So given that most people, this is a pure medical question, given that most people have got very low levels of vitamin D, Do you think NICE protocols should be changed so that when people get acute infections such as sepsis, as well as giving them antibiotics, we should top up the calcifediol, because this will work within a few hours, won't it, to optimize the function of the white cells?
Absolutely. I mean, that is absorbed over hours because it's got one more hydroxyl group on the 25 position. Hydroxyl means water soluble. And so that's what should be taken. And I mean, I have written in the book, or hinted at, no more than hinted, there is a conspiracy going on against vitamin D. It's not, you can't get any money from the Unmentionable Foundation, from the Wellcome Trust, or any of these people for working on vitamin D. In fact, I mean, an enormous amount of work has been done, which clearly shows, and I had retired from medicine, and at the beginning of the pandemic got back into reading up, mugging up on what's on the papers, and it's just overwhelming. You know, it can't be a coincidence that that big pharma is denying vitamin D or just pretending it's not there.
So as a lifelong physician, David, would you say it's in people's best health interests to optimize their vitamin D levels and make themselves vitamin D replete?
Yes. And what you should be aiming for is a level of more than 50 nanograms per mil.
Yeah.
50 to 100. I mean, I've pushed mine from time to time well above 100. Serum calcium is normal, and I take it on its own, actually, because it comes naturally in the sunlight on its own. The problem is we're not getting enough of it, and that way, it's not the only factor you need. The problem is it's the critical factor for two reasons. One, it's absolutely central to how your immune cells function and fight off infections and probably poisons as well. Yes, you need vitamin A, you need zinc, you need other vitamins for K for different functions, but this is one you naturally get. Why not just take a vial once a month? Obviously, don't take the glass in the vial. But, you know, shake it, break it and shake it on a bit of bread. And that gives you background D throughout the year. Cost about €8 a year.
Well, in England, we can't buy these vials, but we can buy 4,000 international unit tablets from supermarkets,
Yes.
which are very cheap. So I tend to take about five or six of those a week.
Yes, the most important thing is actually every so often to check what your vitamin D level is. And by the way, the units are confusing because I mentioned 50 to 100 nanograms, that's ng per ml. But in Britain, we speak of nanomoles per litre. The conversion factor is 2.5. So 50 nanograms per mil equals 125. But it's not sufficient if you're below that. And almost certainly, I mean, another very important factor is that vitamin D, when it acts on a particular cell, it binds the D receptor, switches on whatever genes that cell is specialized for. But it then, having been used, it is destroyed. It's destroyed because it induces, and you don't need a double-blind controlled trial for this. You just need to look at the literature. It always induces its own destruction by stimulating a production of an enzyme called 24-hydroxylase. And 1,24,25 trihydroxyvitamin D does not have an action on the D receptor. It may well have other important actions. I'm not saying that, but it certainly doesn't have the central action.
So vitamin D is a bit like a £5 note in my pocket. Once it's spent, you can't spend it again. It's a single-use molecule. And if we have an
Yeah.
infection that uses up our vitamin D, or if we have certain vaccinations that use up our vitamin D, we need to put more vitamin D in to replace the vitamin D that was used up.
Well, this is the wonderful model of Bill Gates, who's speaking of inevitable further diseases. And God knows there are hundreds of laboratories all over the world working to do what was quite effectively done in Wuhan with the help of American laboratory workers, American scientists,
American money.
and American money, who created what was, it's actually a rather weak bioweapon, because provided your vitamin D replete, it just gives you a nasty cold. But it's got an insert in it which makes it particularly dangerous if you're D deficient. And people have to realize, I would say everybody, I sent a copy of my book to Prince William and said, give this to, show this book to your wife and dad. If whatever they've got, you've all read that there's a bit of cancer running around that family, as there is around every other family, and a bit of sudden death among the elderly.
And there's no question in your mind that your risks of many types of cancer are going to be reduced if your vitamin D levels are adequate.
Absolutely. Certainly the risk of, and for many, I mean, myeloma is one example, but many are actually rendered. But I think there's good papers showing that bowel cancer.
Colon one, definitely, yeah.
You need to push up your D levels. So the studies that need to be done are obvious, and Angus Dalgleish is your expert, and he's already pointed out many problems.
So obvious clinical trials that would be really quite easy to do, supplementing vitamin D, getting the levels above 50 nanograms per mil, which is 125 nanomoles per litre, but getting those levels up there, following these patients up for years. And we are convinced, you, me and Professor Dalgleish, to name but three, and you and Professor Dalgleish are the important ones, believe that would drastically reduce the incidence of new cancers.
Well, it's absolutely vital that this is initiated. And the British health authorities need to boot out people who know nothing about vitamin D, who don't know anything about the science behind it. Read David Grimes's my two books, because and some of the papers that are there, and just listen to and ask questions. Don't rely on others to tell you the answers.
And David's papers go back to the early 90s. I mean, this book here by David Grimes, absolutely superb.
It is.
Absolutely superb. And we've known this for 30 years. Dr. Grimes did the research. You and Dr. Grimes have written the books. This is not speculative science done by a few people in a hippie commune somewhere. This is mainstream medicine.
Absolutely. And another feature of mainstream medicine, I'm afraid, today, is that it acts in the interests of big pharma. David mentions early in that original book, he's questions very, very strongly the campaign against cholesterol. Which, of course, half the world seems to be taking statins of one kind or another. Cholesterol is an essential component of our cells, and to block it at an early stage with the enzyme way before 7-dehydrocholesterol is criminal, actually. It's a criminal activity. I suppose part of my career when I believed what was written in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, and likewise high-level reliable journals. They were reliable, but they're not
Well,
reliable anymore for that kind of study, I'm afraid.
it must be a great source of grief to you to see this abandonment of accurate scientific reporting that's gradually deteriorated throughout your career.
It is. It makes one wonder, when the penny finally drops, and what's happening. Unfortunately, the penny is dropping very, very slowly. It doesn't seem to be affected by gravity very much, but it will drop eventually as more and more people die of turbo cancers, and more people, more and more medics turn round and actually start to ask serious scientific questions.
Absolutely. We are completely pro-science, not the science. No one is the science. This is the process of science, which is humanity's quest to understand the nature of the world that we live in via empirical and logical
Yes.
means. And the abandonment and the reduction of that to be replaced by vested corporate interests is just appalling. The prostitution of science is
And
appalling.
it's also the discouragement of asking questions. People should be asking questions and expecting answers, not saying, I'm not a scientist. I didn't study science, David. This is all beyond me. Sorry. Education has to turn back and say, you have to answer questions honestly. You have to ask them, first of all. There's a famous Maltese doctor called Dr. De Bono, who was a bit of a philosopher. And one of the things he said was, the failure to ask questions lies, I can't quote it off the top of my head, lies at the bottom of many of it's one of the main problems with mankind, and it's the fear of being wrong. It's better to ask enough questions for some of them to be wrong than to ask no questions and always be right.
Edward de Bono, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the mass outbreak of curiosity deficit disorder, it could be some strange transmissible virus that gets into the brain and turns off everyone's curiosity circuits.
Well, or it could just be paid for, because people who are supposed to be the most curious, they were called. What did we used to call them? Correspondents or something like that. Journalists, was it?
I remember there is a term called journalists. I can't quite remember what it means now because don't think I've seen many for a long time. But my dad told me about it.
And even when they managed to kill that poor lovely girl, one of their producers in the northeast of England, aged 44 with the vaccine, worked for local BBC. Her photograph is shown in our book. Even then, the BBC, which receives a decent sum from Gates Foundation, of the 316 million pounds or dollars paid originally, I think the BBC got, probably only about 10 million or something, but even the Guardian got a decent amount. Actually, I think the Guardian may have got more. But they're paying off people because, and this brings me to a point which I think is very important, and that is the value of money. Money should be a form of barter. It evolved as a form of barter. It shouldn't be that you can do what Gates and Warren Buffett and Mrs. Gates used to do. She's now left the Gates Foundation. And on the ground of something disorder which has been going around in very wealthy people. Accusation, didn't like it. The chap called
There's
You used to
various
have
things that have been
yeah, the
alleged. So
various.
well, I don't know about these things, David.
No, no, I don't know about them.
No,
But
no, but
but
there has been allegations made, but I don't know anything about them.
but what it has, what but turning back to the value of money and the fact that you can make money just by investing money, if you're clever enough and you've got enough of it, and some people make a profession of this, that means that is very, very dangerous, especially when it's linked to the origins of the origins of the disaster, the world war that we're living in now, which I think could be called World War D3. But it's also
It's a slow motion war, but I think there is one.
there is, and it's against the truth. It's against people who speak the truth. And George Orwell said that the more tyranny advances, the greater life is problematic for those that speak the truth. So we have at the moment, we've got a major inflection point, in my opinion, in this pandemic. It started with a rather innocent little virus, evolved unnaturally in a laboratory from the backbone virus of a horseshoe bat and the head of a virus of a pangolin. And even that wasn't enough. So they're stuck in a thing called the furin site, which was promptly patented by and who and one of them, I've forgotten whether it's Pfizer suing Moderna or the other way around or both ways. It's mind-boggling. So patenting things really has to be properly controlled. And I'm afraid Dwight Eisenhower said famously in his final address, it's worth looking at that on YouTube. What did he say?
Yeah.
He said he was very worried about the increasing power of the military-industrial complex. And he was talking about a country called the United States of America.
I've heard of it. Yeah. So global problem with money to sense ratio and money to ethical practice ratio as well. I'm sure our viewers will give us views on that.